So a couple of housekeeping points before we get started. We got a crowded room. Welcome. We're so happy to see you. Be careful of the cords that are right up front. Anybody walking up here, just a little bit. Lift your feet up high. We're going to bring authors up in 3 or 4 groups. And so they'll come along and sit up here and then pass the microphone down and read one at a time. So when you're called for your group, please everybody come up together, kind of like high school choir. Remember how we used to do it? So there's refreshments over there. Help yourself. And all of you who are contributors to the journal, please make sure you get a copy before you go home, because we are so happy that you are contributors. And we thank you very much. And that's our way of saying thanks, is to give you a complimentary copy of the journal and invite you to come to this event. So we're going to get started here in just about a minute. If you have any, restrooms are back here. Any questions about anything? Okay. Hi, I'm Maureen Carroll. I'm the editor-in-chief of On-Car Press, and I'd like to welcome you all today. This is a live-streamed event. We are on Facebook Live. Woot woot. So hopefully you wanted your words to get out there. We're here to celebrate the journal, The Right Bridge. This is our 7th journal. It's our 3rd print journal. And we have some wonderful contributors, artists, as well as authors, poets in this journal. And I'd like to first off introduce myself and then my staff, who's helped create this wonderful book. I hope you all will enjoy. I have been the editor-in-chief of On-Car Press for 10 years, and we publish a lot of different kinds of books, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and this journal. And what we focus on are authors with powerful voices, people with something to say. I know we all have something to say, but it's those authors, those words that stick with us. So kind of our motto is, we've all read a book at some time in our life, I'm sure, and the words from that book have stuck with us and become part of our motto, part of our life. They've enhanced our life. And that's what we're focusing on when we publish, is those kinds of powerful voices. And we have a lot of really powerful voices in this book. Editor-in-chief, our assistant, is Amber Fraley, who's in the back of the room. If you don't have your book, she'll be happy to help you with that. She's also going to read today. She teaches journalism at the University of Kansas, and she'll tell you a little bit more about herself when she comes up. And our poetry editor is Ian Cook. And I know a lot of you have worked with him in getting your poetry and such ready for the journal. And we very much appreciate not only Ian's editing for this journal, but also his interview of Marcia Epstein and his contributions to this community and to the broader community of healing. Healing is a big part of what this is all about. This topic is called Grief and Comfort, in part because we received a lot of submissions after our Solitude and Solidarity journal. And rather than focusing on solitude, we focused on solidarity. And with the solidarity part of it, we kind of left aside a lot of the more painful submissions that we received. We looked at those again when we created this journal. So some of those were included. But what we discovered, and what I know a lot of you have discovered, is since 2020, things have been kind of hard for folks. True? And the concept of grief and comfort has really become important in our lives. So we didn't want to just share grief. We all have experienced that, I believe. We also wanted to share the comfort component, because that's how we can help each other heal. So I think there's an enormous amount of wisdom in this journal that we can benefit from. I've actually enjoyed reading it since it's already been produced. Please forgive the errors. We do our best, but we produce it pretty quickly. In any case, without further ado, I would like to read just a little bit from the introduction and then introduce our first author, Dennis Hargis. So the introduction, again, is about what this journal is. In each edition of The Right Bridge, readers are encouraged to mind the gap as writers and artists with powerful voices explore topics that broaden our thinking. The Right Bridge presents two opposing ideas for creators and readers to delve into, seriously or in fun, in order to stretch our imaginations, to move beyond boundaries, and to bridge the gap. We hope the themes of this Right Bridge journal, grief and comfort, will inspire strength and hope, as well as entertain you. Now, one thing that I thought about a lot in writing my introduction for this journal is how we offer comfort to each other. And what do we do? How do we best offer comfort for ourselves and other people? There's lots of ways to offer comfort, but some of it's not really welcomed. Are grief and comfort two sides of a coin? What does comfort mean? We usually think of comfort as something soft and pillowy, squishy and squeezy, warm and cuddly. But comfort actually comes from the word fortis, which means strong, powerful, mighty, vigorous, firm, steadfast, courageous, brave, and bold. Nothing squishy there. We may conceive of grief as an affliction, something we suffer from, a black cloud hanging overhead. Yet grief is a process. Processes require change, and change doesn't happen in a moment. It takes time. We need strength to get through a time of grief. What are we processing when we grieve? We're processing the stories of our lives. Perhaps all we are at our core is story. Gregory Nixon in the Journal of Consciousness says, we were created somehow in time, so our story begins. We live our lives through time, remembering some of the accumulated past as it recedes into the distance. And we face the sudden inevitable halt of time, and so our story ends. When we look back at our life, what we remember is story. But what about before the story began, or after it ends? According to Nixon, Gregory Nixon, time and causation seem to precede our brief existence, and will continue once that existence flickers out. He asks, is that not the way it is? And then answers his own question, no. No, not according to physics. According to physics, time doesn't exist. It's a construct of the human mind. Einstein believed in a block universe and said straight up, time is an illusion. The future already exists just as the past exists, right alongside the present, all of the time. There is no present, no past, and there is no arrow of time according to the theory of relativity. Yet grief is a product of time, just as all of our experiences are a product of time. Time is change. This is why we sometimes wish for time to hold still. So we can hold on to a feeling, keep a love forever in a timeless sameness. But what does timeless mean? This is an exploration of words. Sorry, words, you know words. Authors. To speak of timelessness after time ends or before time begins is a logical error, according to Nixon, since before and after are terms that derive meaning by being part of time. Timelessness cannot be found before or after time. Even in the case of the Big Bang, if there is eternity, it must forever be in a postulated actual present. The same applies to human life, my life and your life. Time and experience are forever entwined. To experience is to experience time. Perhaps experience and time are quantum entangled, just two faces of the same mystery. Without time, change, or motion, there is nothing to experience, asserts Nixon. And without experience, perception, and consciousness, there is no time. Einstein wrote a condolence letter to the wife of his longtime friend, the physicist Michel Besso, saying, "Now he has departed this strange world a little ahead of me. That signifies nothing. For us believing physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." For Einstein, comfort was in the awareness that we are all together, embedded in time. Our loved ones exist just as we exist, entwined in time, bound forever, a forever that is now, a forever that is woven of story. And the stories remain the same. The stories we live, read, the stories we watch, stories of love and grief, from Greek myths to religious parables to Marvel comics, have repeating themes. Ancient stories still resonate in our modern world. How many stories of grief are there? According to Suzanne Gregg, contributor to this journal, in our lives we love with a dozen different kinds of love. It follows then that we grieve with a dozen different kinds of grief. From the expected death in an expected time frame to a call in the middle of the night. She explores these in variations on grief. And although grief is usually linked to death, Chuck Warner describes how the shift in our world since the pandemic has left many of us lamenting the loss of the familiar, in grieving the loss of normalcy, craving the customary, missing the mundane. This has especially impacted youth. And Dennis Hargis, who's going to speak in a moment, and Peg Nichols, both give examples on how to help a grieving world by reaching out to young people. The journey of grief can be a really rough ride, and we all need a safe space to land, as Amber Fraley points out, in the mouths of babes. But the journey of grief cannot be shortened. Grief can't be bypassed. There's no detour. There's no shortcut. You might as well make friends with grief. Embrace the journey, as Michelle McKay urges in The Building. One way to embrace the journey is through story. Iris Craver gives instructions on how to write your grief and how a pencil can help. She encourages us to give sorrow words. And Randy Kidd wrote of being in nature, the processing that time and nature allows. In Geese, he thanks nature for providing insights not available in my human world. Writing through illness can help with the loss of health. Writing about death can help with loss of a loved one. And writing about nature, feeling how nature is in our life, can find a place for healing as well. Dan Nagengast, writes how our connection with nature can help us be present now in Death of a Policeman. We tell ourselves stories. These become the maps of our lives, as Ken Ashley points out, in Stories That Comfort and Terrify. The tales we tell, the words we weave, define and create our reality. But we can retell our stories. We can reimagine our experience of this ever-present now to find comfort, strength, and even humor on our journey of grief, as Margaret Kumar points out in Interview with an Author. The Right Bridge Journal is a response to grief, a way to process, and when we discover words, essays, stories, poems that touch us, these can act as a balm and help to heal us. There is power in a pencil. Tragedy can become a comedy. As Jerry Massington demonstrates in Job's wife's story, he's not here to read today, but I hope you will read it. It's hilarious. There is a way that we can take our tragedies and make them into comedy. We have several professional healers who are represented in this journal today, including Ian Cook, his interview with Marcia Epstein, Suzanne Gregg, Dennis Hargis, Iris Craver, and others. You'll find their wisdom within. And we just had a National Grief Appreciation Day. Chuck Warner wonders, what should we say to each other on that day? Happy Grief Appreciation Day? In any case, thank you for being here for our sampler, and I'd like to bring up Dennis Hargis now. Thank you, Dennis.
Hello, my name is Dennis Hargis, and I would like to talk a little bit about how to be happy being you. And I just got my note card, so let's see. Here we go. Hope. It's something that we all need. It's a belief that good things can happen even when life is rough. It's a positive attitude that gives us strength. Without it, darkness and depression can overcome the body and the mind. Love, the universal virtue that binds us all together. The unifying force that makes life worth living. There's many forms of love: love of God, love of family, love of fellow man. Faith, something that helps us achieve success. The impossible becomes possible. These are the virtues that we need to instill in our young people. Kindness, forgiveness, compassion. These are the steps towards happiness. Happiness for ourselves and for others. At this time, our teens are entering a world full of monumental challenges. I mean, there is a diversity of people living together, different political and religious views, different cultures, different races, inflation, people living from paycheck to paycheck, the gap between the rich and the poor increasing every day, the homeless, racial prejudice, hatred, hate crimes, mass shootings, climate change, storms increasing in intensity and frequency, floods, droughts, forest fires. These are the challenges that our youth are going to have to face. And unfortunately, in the last decade, there's been a steadily decline in the teens of our nation. Right. So, according to the World Health Organization, there are approximately 1 out of 7 10 to 19-year-olds that experience a mental disorder. The Center for Disease Control in America reports that there are over 5,400 suicide attempts each day by students from 7 through 12. You know, that's a little bit over 2 million. So what this means is we need to students are going to have to make value decisions, and they're going to have to solve problems. Now, in this book, there's a step process. And the first process that we teach kids, and by the way, this applies to adults as well as it applies to kids or teens. First step is to recognize anger, your anger, and your anger trigger. You know, a lot of times in society, they teach us that anger is bad, so therefore you must be bad. But very important first step. Second step, to identify the underlying painful feeling that comes under the anger. And why is this important? Well, if you don't do it, you could experience faulty communication. You could have disturbed interpersonal skills. It's also a prime time for addictions. And research tells us that it can lead to physical problems, such as headaches, ulcers, digestive problems, anorexia nervosa, heart disease, a whole range. Step number 3, and this is to own the problem. A lot of times we put it off on somebody else. We say, oh, you make me so angry. Or because of you, I'm frustrated. The problem is your feelings come from your thoughts in your mind. And a lot of times you need to admit to those and own them. It's not somebody else's problem, it's your problem. Then you gotta feel the pain. Nobody wants to feel the pain. When you're grieving, do you want to feel the pain? No. But why do you need to? Because if you don't, you are going to run into some problems. If you do it correctly, you're going to start developing virtues. These are the virtues, which is step 5. These are the things that, again, lead to our happiness. And that, in turn, leads to our character development. I mean, what kind of person do you want to be? What kind of person do your kids want to be? So anyway, that's the process. And what I like to do, because the book goes through different developmental stages of kids and their problems. So what I like to do is do a visualization exercise. I don't know if any of you have ever done a visualization exercise, but there's a lot of visualization in the book because that's how you can comprehend information better. So I want you all to take a deep breath, relax. You're going to go back to your teenage years. You all are going to become teenagers again. You're going to see that high school building of yours, and you're going to enter the hallways and walk down the halls. You're going to see your teachers and the subjects that they taught: English, science, social studies. And you realize academics are important. Then comes sports. You become a member of a team. Or there's art, music, drama, opportunities for self-expression. These are important. Establishing friendships, developing communication skills, interpersonal relationships. This is important. Then there's dating, trying to control a massive influx of hormones. This is very important. And then there's also going through and trying to prepare for a job or a career in the future. Again, this is important. Be happy, remember the goal, be happy, and serve others, and reach your potential. That's the goal. All right, now you're going to become in one of the special groups of teens. All right, group number 1. You have a physical disability. Why am I in this wheelchair? There's the bell. I gotta change classes. I hate this. Boy, I need to suck it up because PE is next. I'm going someplace new. Why am I in, or I wonder if they're going to have a ramp. Next group. You have a learning disability. I'm heading for my 3rd grade reading class. You know what? Everybody's reading 1 or 2 grade levels above me. No matter how hard I try, I can't catch up. I'm so frustrated. Now I'm in high school. I hate to read. I am so stupid. Next group. You have a mental illness. I'm so depressed. I don't want to leave my room. Please leave me alone. They tell me that I'm bipolar. They tell me that it's because I have a chemical imbalance in my brain. They tell me that it's not my fault. Why don't I believe them? I know I'm crazy. Next group. You're in a juvenile delinquent center. I'm locked up. I've lost my freedom. I know I've been having problems ever since Dad abandoned me and my mom. I know I shouldn't have hung out with those guys. They got me in nothing but trouble. What am I going to do when I get out? nobody's ever going to trust me again. Last category. You figured out that you're LGBTQ. Am I a bad person? Why do I have to be this way? Why do I feel guilty? What am I going to do? Okay, remember, everybody is unique and everybody counts. Don't let other people judge or dictate who you are. Remember the goal. Be happy. Serve others and reach your potential. Okay, you can take that deep breath. You can now return to today. You're no longer a teenager, which I don't know about you, but that's kind of a relief for me. So anyway, some of the things that a teenager has to go through, and actually we all have to go through, are different psychological conditions. I mean, that's just the way we're made up. And of these, there's a number of them. Let me read them to you. I wanted to know if you guys are you're familiar with most of them, maybe all of them. Repression, suppression, depression, shame and guilt, grief, sadness, failure, dependency, and victimization. Now, how many of you can tell me every one of their definitions and what's the prescribed measure to deal with them? Can all of you? How many of you think that a teenager can do that? Probably not a lot. Let's just take one of them, okay? Let's take an easy one. Depression. Okay, what's the definition of depression? It's severe unhappiness or hopelessness. A cause, where does depression come from? Depression comes from painful feelings that we don't ignore, that we bury in our mind, don't acknowledge, don't accept. What happens? Why is it important to deal with them? Well, if you don't deal with them, you usually have a lack of energy. You don't want to do anything. You can't get anything done. It's a prime time for addictions, if you have addictions. And if things get really bad, you can but think about suicide. So a lot of good reasons on probably why we need to address it. Now, what do you do about it? Well, most important thing to do is keep a routine, a normal routine. I mean, even though you can't stand to get up in the morning and it makes you unhappy and all that, try to be as normal as possible. Don't isolate yourself. Make sure you have a friend or something to talk to. And if that doesn't work, if you start thinking about suicide thoughts, then it's best to go ahead and talk to your parent or adult. Could be a teacher, could be a counselor, and then that will kind of help you to decide if you need a mental health person. I mean, there's no shame for getting help. And if you read the news, it'd be a lot better if a lot of our youth and stuff sought out that help. So anyway, I thought I didn't want to take too much time here because I don't want to go over my time limit. So I'm going to read 2 paragraphs and then wrap this up from the book. I didn't want to read very much because I know you got to get bored when people read. I do. I don't want to bore too many people because I don't want to walk in, walk out. Remember to work with others, love others, and live life to its fullest. Be patient. Work out a coordinated plan and work for improvement in your goals and aspirations. Focus on the positive. Everyone counts because everyone has a soul that was sent by the highest realm. When we get in touch with our spirit, the essence of who we are, miracles can and do happen. Remember, life is an ever-changing journey with lots of opportunity for personal transformation to make it what you want it to be. Don't be afraid to look at yourself and change what needs to be changed. Remember, change is just a process incorporating hard work, dedication, moderation, using three powerful virtues of faith, hope, and love. But change is what we must want to do, that we feel we need to do. It can't be something that others want us to do. So let your virtues define who you are and what you can become. Make your life in this world count and live up to your potential. The world needs you. You're capable of amazing things. Strive for a life that honors yourself and those you love. Be kind, work hard, stay humble, give assistance to others, have faith, never give up, stay focused, fulfill your destiny, be happy being you. So, how many of you have a teenager in your life that you love? Could this book possibly give them knowledge and guidance without being preachy? Could this book possibly help them with some of the pain that they're going to go through in life? Could this book possibly help them to be happy, reach their potential, to be able to serve others? I leave that with you. A loud applause and thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Now I'd like to invite Ian Cook and a group of poets to come up and read. I'm going to read your names, and if you'll come up, I'd appreciate it. You will be here and we'll come right next to you. Okay. So, Keely Alexander, Stephanie Burrows, Julie Bryn, Brian Daldorf. Would you guys come up and read? Go on that table. Thanks. Would you go on that table? Oh, yeah. Stephanie. No, I haven't seen this time. I was there. I'm trying to make sure everybody gets in the shot.
Okay, there's Alex. We need Alice here.
There's this, and then you can pass that one down. Okay. Are you good? Okay, so it's ready to pass down now. It should be easy to turn on. It's.
Check.
That one's not on.
Hello, camera here. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming. This is this is a heavy journal. I was asked to edit the poetry section by Mickey after having a few conversations about the kind of work that I've been involved with the past few years and kind of where my main goals and intentions are kind of here in the local area and what I value. Where to start? So I've been involved for the past few years in mental health spaces and in the psychedelic assisted therapy space. I have a family member that was negatively affected by psychedelics, and as a result, they have schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. So for the past 10 years or so, it was us trying to learn what happened in her situation, why things happened the way they did, finding support with groups like NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, finding peer support groups. And so it's been a long journey of us dealing with mental health in my family. And about 3 years ago, she had her most recent episode. And as a result, I had my own mental health crisis. So I had my own, I have bipolar type 1. So I had my own bipolar episode as a result of their episode. And I credit the fact that I had a few years of sobriety under my belt. I had a couple years of therapy, hard therapy work, cognitive behavioral therapy, before I had my crisis. And so I credit having a mental health foundation and a support system already in place as one of the main reasons why I was able to stabilize, find help, really get a control of my condition, and really find strength in community and sharing and being vulnerable in spaces and talking about my mental health and talking about the fact that I have bipolar disorder. Just saying that allows others to say, I also have it too, and their support and shared experiences. So my sister did not have that support. She didn't have the conditions that were conducive to her getting better. And so my goals and my values in life are built on love and care and kindness and support, all the things that she didn't have at a time that she really needed it. And so that's my main goal these past few years is building community, building support, educating people on the use of psychedelics. They can be a very, very healing thing, and they can also be a very, very damaging thing if it's not used in the right circumstances. And so just raising awareness and education, and those are core tenets of my beliefs. And so just as a result of my work, doing that, advocating, talking about mental health support structures, I really kind of got back into the Lawrence scene last year. I set a few intentions of I really wanted to connect again with Lawrence. I've been here since 2009. I went to KU for my undergrad and ended up just staying. But in between that, when I first came here and in my mid-20s, I was drinking a lot and smoking a lot. I had substance abuse issues, and my wife and I, we ended up getting sober because we had to. It was really a case of life or death. And so finding those support structures, finding ways to help support other people, that's my main goal these days. So last year, I think it was the William Stafford birthday reading last year. It was like my first big event here, and I met so many wonderful people that I'm friends with today, and that really encouraged me to get my first book published. So Vishuddha is my first book of poetry. These are poems I wrote in my early mid-20s. Meeting folks in this community inspired me to try to get this thing published finally. I had it mostly in a finished state, and I kind of sat on it for a few years as a result of mental health issues and substance abuse and all these things. But so this was kind of a culmination of a many year journey of crystallizing and processing and making something. And so I'm eternally grateful for the choices, the chances I've had to be a part of this community and be supported by it. So I'll read a poem from this book that deals with grief, and it's called Awake. Awake, as in that grieving process event. Awake. Every living creature on earth dies alone. We hear everything around us as we die, but to us it is only the wind, restless chattering in the day, enraptured branches in the night, like crows surrounding a black corpse, laying leaves and thin sticks, adornment, studying the wounds, remembering swirls in its obscure eyes, its feathers, like elephants left by mother's side for days and then weeks, and then they curl, becoming a corpse beside a corpse. Passerby stops to stroke stranger's bones. Like great apes congregate to watch a cadaver carried out, refuse meals and mope, and carry a corpse for days, rage against the body of the dead. Like cats coaxing old paths through the house, a constant calling out for what is not there, forgetting how to take care of itself. And that was an exploration of grief and how every creature kind of grieves in its own ways. And for me, grief was how I process it was through writing. And so poetry is how I translate and how I move through things and make sense of my things. So when I was asked by Mickey to read the poems for this journal, I was a little scared at first because I know I'm very sensitive and I really latch onto things sometimes, but I also know it's such a healing part for people to process in these ways. And so I've been involved in a grief support group for the past year or so with Marsha Epstein. She's a local counselor here. She really she deals with grief in a number of ways. Suicide is one of her main focuses, and loss in that. I met her through artist and writer communities last year too, and so through my work, I work at Miller Retirement Group, it's a retirement investment group here downtown. I was noticing that every few weeks somebody was passing, whether that was a spouse or a family member. People were just getting to that age in retirement where people were just passing away, and so I wanted to help create a free to attend grief support group for the town. So we do those every first and third Wednesdays at 1 p.m. At the Lawrence Public Library for now. Being in those circles, peer support circles, people just talking about stuff, people coming and sharing for the first time of the things that they're going through. I think it's the simplest thing, but also the hardest thing to do is to find people that just to talk to and share. And running that group for the past few months has been incredibly helpful for my own grieving process as well. So I'm very much grieving my family member situation and the losses I've had. And being a part of this journal also is a self-processing too. So I was going to read, I'll read the small essay I have in here, and then I'll read the poem I submitted to the journal as well. This essay is titled "My Grief." It's on page 7 or 80 if people want to read it. My grief is an ever-changing thing. It comes in many forms and changes shapes through them. Fluid. My grief comes slow. It comes quick. Sometimes it is undefined and amorphous. When I feel comfortable in it, my grief goes another way, brought on by the anniversary of a date, the smell of dried lavender, the ringing of wind chimes on a summer day, wrought wounds fresh as the day they happened. I have 3 distinct griefs in my life that I deal with currently. My grandpa, grandma, and sister Fiona. I miss my grandparents. They were taken from me in very different ways. My grandfather Dean's slow death over the course of years living with Alzheimer's disease, the long goodbye. My grandmother Ruth's sudden passing from a hernia that had healed and then opened again. It took her 3 days to go. What time makes of grief? Such different experiences. A slow burn where the dull, soft repetition of reality enables peace to settle in. We said our goodbyes to Grandpa long ago when he still had pieces of him left. It merely took his body years to catch up. Or the quickness of the reaper collecting overdue bounty. Death delayed by the strength of the body who has more to give, its capacity to heal, but also its fragility, not knowing how dangerous it was for my grandma to get out of bed that day. Grief is a metamorphosis of circumstances, shifting contexts through having a hard time to dealing as we can to I'm in my own crisis. I was so affected by the event of my sister's mental health crisis that the vibrations of my being were shaken apart and misaligned into chaos, myself unwell. I was left to sort out the madness of mental planes, left seeking health and wellness after going through my own bipolar crisis. Finding a balance for myself, but not in time for my sister, who I couldn't help anymore. I wish I could share the stillness of my current practice and systems for daily living, hopefully abate the visions and auditory clamor she experiences. Mourning my sister's absence is like mourning a living ghost, neither here nor there, unsure of what or where. How does one grieve an uncertainty? By feeling and processing. How do I feel and process my grief? Through writing, professing spells, confessing states of sadness, expressing my feelings and being all right, embracing the things I feel. What a gift to be in the presence of someone who feels so much. A kind stranger once told me as they came across me weeping in the wetlands. I had biked out into greenery to attend to my regular practice, to cast spells of wellness for my sister, for myself, and my loved ones, in nature, through nature. For weeks, I did shadow work, asking myself the question, what would you do if you found out she was actually deceased? In the midst of psychedelic experience that day in the wetlands, I imagined that I finally knew that she had passed, created the experience in my mind to live through it, grieved in a resolving way. Even though I didn't know for sure, I entertained the thought, and it allowed me to fully mourn her situation, feel the grief that I avoided thinking about. There is a strange comfort in not knowing, but also an avoidance of what could be, the actual reality. Maybe she was dead. Maybe I truly will not see her again in this life. But there is always what comes after. After I finished telling that kind stranger about my sister and our story, she offered a hug. The stranger was pretty close to the same size and body type as my sister, and so when I hugged her, it felt like hugging my sister again. A chance to actually say goodbye. That was comfort. That was healing. I'll see my sister again in the big pond from whence we came, the same one our spirit wills to journey towards, leaving this vessel of living earth, the vibrations of being slowed to stillness. Grief is being in that stillness, having found it after years and months and weeks and days of dealing with the way things are, were once, could have been, will be. My grief went on, but it changed form into mourning, commemorating, honoring the dead, instead of just being sad and stuck in woe. And the longer I keep the names of the dead upon my tongue, the more they are alive in golden light, the memory of their love. My work in the mental health and psychedelic assisted therapy space has brought me comfort. My journey was started 3 years ago in the midst of chaos and madness, but the work since brought an abundance of healing. For me, through the process of being and helping, in building community and speaking into the dark of grief, hopefully we can provide a guiding hand to those that need it, a tether to lead us back to the light of love. In reading poems for this collection of grief and comfort, I found a disparity. More poems about grief than comfort were submitted, and so the choices inevitably carried a similar ratio. I think this speaks to the nature of these two topics and what captures more of our attention. Grief, an all-encompassing cloak, that which takes more of our focus and energy away from life. Comfort seems harder to find. Perhaps we can give each other the support and community that we as individuals need. Help us discover comfort, processing along one another. Thank you to all the writers, artists, and creatives that helped contribute to this collection of grief and comfort. We hope that in community we can help each other through the dark wood to find the golden path to healing. That's the first time I've read that out loud. I typically write poetry, so writing a longer form essay like that was a deep rumination on my process and what I've been going through. So that itself was very healing. So being a part of this journal and working and processing through these things, that is how I deal with myself and how I heal. In terms of community, I wanted to mention the Lawrence Psychedelic Society. So that was a group I started last year here in Lawrence to help build local community, connect folks with each other, like-minded individuals, people that have questions about the psychedelic space and even what it means to use those medicines in an intentional, safe, and educated way, what it means to prepare for a journey, what it means to integrate an experience and really find healing from it. And so we started that group last year. We have a solid group of people that are really involved in building community and wanting to get more out there and help support people. So we have a conference, more of like an informational meet and greet. We had that October 5th from 3 to 6 p.m. at the Lawrence Public Library, the auditorium. We're inviting mental health professionals, clinicians, counselors, therapists, psychiatrists. We're also inviting veterans, first responders, EMS workers, firefighters, police, people on the front lines, people that have PTSD, people that are going through ongoing trauma. We're trying to help connect people that may need medicine the most and the mental health structures and organizations we have in the area to help best support them. So that October 5th meet and greet is going to be a community forming. I just want people to come together and meet and talk and then see if there's room for collaboration. So we're meeting. If anyone's interested in learning more about that, we have the Lawrence Psychedelic Society. If you Google that and then Google Linktree, You can find us on Facebook, but Linktree is where we have our main links. So it's if you'd like to learn more and maybe join the group. I'm going to close with the poem I submitted to the journal, and I really appreciate everybody for being here and all the support and community. Thank you all. This is the most healing part is people and community. So this poem is titled "Good Grief." Grief is a circle, a cycle going round from the top down, but from the side we see a spiral upward through levels of understanding, stages of healing, becoming more okay with what has happened, is happening, and will happen again. As the season changes, so too does grief. And as the season returns, so too does grief. But the hurt is changed, returns but not the same. Grief becomes okay, all right in time, as all things do. Thank you.
Please welcome Annette Billings.
Good afternoon. Not yet. From the moment of her cancer diagnosis until her death 59 days later, I was staunchly at the front and firmly in the center of all care provided for my beloved Joyce. Far outnumbered by malignant cells, I hoped my dogged presence as her guard might offer some sort of defense. Equal parts lifelong partner and fierce advocate, I could be either a model of diplomacy or aggressive as a mean dog, depending on the situation. My quest to be as determined to protect her as the cancer was in metastasizing. Together, we went to battle, her New York moxie and my Midwest tenacity. Between doctor's appointments and lab work and intravenous port placements, she endured seemingly overnight hair loss and rapid emaciation that seemed to happen faster than was physically possible. She soon looked as though some cruel syringe had stealthily sucked weight from her. I tried to see that she stayed amply supplied with what she needed and wanted most: butter pecan, ice cream, Sonic Ice, Pepsi, and long-acting pain medications. We were not going to give up. No way had she relocated all the way from the Bronx, New York, to Topeka, Kansas, to die 2 months later. Surely something would stop the stage 4 sarcoma of unknown origin. We would not concede defeat until plans for the second round of chemo were canceled because the cancer had advanced undeterred by the first round of chemo. We began hospice care in our home, where many of her belongings remained unpacked. The day that she died, after many hours of being unresponsive, I watched her fight to regain enough consciousness to open her eyes to look at me one last time, so our souls could have a final conversation. She died in my arms with our circle of friends and family supporting us. I watched with worry when the funeral home workers came to take her body, afraid they'd fracture one of the many of her bones the cancer had invaded. Those bones, that body, no less precious to me dead. I grabbed my jacket and my purse as they secured her body to the gurney. I was going with her. Faces in the room looked at me with a mixture of confusion and concern as I walked toward the door with her. The two mortuary men, one at Joyce's head, the other at her feet, paused. Silence. Someone from behind me, perhaps the hospice nurse, put a hand on each of my shoulders and turned me to face her. She shook her head slowly. I felt other hands take my purse and ease my jacket off. I closed my eyes, weeping. Someday, Annette, a kind voice said, you can go with Joyce, but not yet. Thank you.
I'm Iris Craver, and my poem is titled Solitude After a Son's Suicide, and it's on page 113 in the journal. I am alone with my grief. Sure, friends and family tried to comfort me after my son killed himself. I sat for 10 days. Everyone brought lots of bread. I was alone, surrounded by loving voices. There was a memorial. Lots of people came. I cried and hugged everyone. His brother read the eulogy. I held my husband's hand, trying to remember that my heart was still beating. My old therapist came out of retirement to listen. The other survivors of suicide in the support group told me their stories. Still, surviving my son's suicide is a solitary life. I go to the store, the movies, potlucks, seeing others every day, and yet I might as well be in the backwoods, secluded, off the map. This grief keeps me in solitary confinement. I read that solitude is good soul food. I'm stuffed.
Okay. I am Stephanie Barrows. Is this one? Yes. And I wrote this poem in 2010. I've since written a lot more poems, but this is the one I like the most, so this is the one I'm reading. So, Dreaming in the Forest. The trees alone don't make the forest. We all do. Gazing out the sanctuary window, I see a scattering of leaves. Are these the wandering companions I cultivated in dreams? In my rush for mastery and planting hundreds of seeds in a forest, my senses were captivated. Unable to see, I trod upon my faithful companions, the moss, fern, and fungus, the smallest and youngest of trees, the herbs who sought my care. One day, my feet discovered what my hands would not, a willingness to humble themselves, a healing power beyond compassion, a life blessed with meaning. Opening again, these inner eyes burned with the cool fire of equanimity. All channels are enlivened, all faith is restored, all love is flowing. An old dream ends as an evolving landscape transforms a woman's journey, and the forest awakens to the sound of running water.
Hello, my name is Keely Alexander. I'm a psychologist from a few hours down the road in Columbia, Missouri, but I began and ended my training here at the University of Kansas. So it's very meaningful to share this poem called Reflections from a Therapist with you here today. And I will also share a second one about a relationship that also began and ended here in Lawrence. So the first one is called Reflections from a Therapist. Burnout. It follows her as she walks through the doors, hanging on by a thread, barely making it to work some days without a pep talk. Holding space for others is her life's work, unimaginably hard work. But what a sacred thing, bearing witness to the deepest hurts and beautiful resilience of other humans. Just when she thinks this week is the hardest, like so many other weeks, a student says, "Thank you for actually teaching us." Just when she thinks this week is the hardest, like so many other weeks, a client shares how their work together in therapy changed their life. Whiplash, gratitude, grief, deep emotional connections. One second she asks herself, how can I keep doing this job? And the next second brings unexpected, profound understanding that she's helping others through the darkest of times. The honor and privilege of this work brings so much baggage. Of course, a heavy load leads to exhaustion. Do those moments make it worth it? These are the types of questions a decade of training didn't prepare her for. She wants to keep doing it, but she's dying for a slower pace, a lighter load. Burnout. It holds her hand as she walks through the doors, yet she still shows up. Do these moments make it worth it? The answer is a gentle, loving yes if she keeps finding ways to show up for herself in the ways she shows up for those students and clients. They change her in ways she never knew was possible. What a sacred thing, bearing witness to the deepest hurts and beautiful resilience of other humans. So that's from the perspective of a therapist. And this second one is from a therapist who also has deep hurts that we all go through. So this one is called Getaway Car. He was my getaway car, so I thought, escaping towards something always. What I thought would be a safe haven ended up shattering me to my core. Our feet on the gas, passion tricking me to believe it'd last. He was a sleek, attractive sports car, whipping me around turns, first at fun, freeing, exhilarating speeds. But as I whisper slow down, he speeds up. Gears shift into violent turbulence. I blinked and somehow found myself in the back seat, someone new in the passenger. From the back, I screamed, "What about me? I'm your wife. What about our life?" Mangled metal wreckage. Of course it ended in collision. Caution tape wrapped around the scene. We assessed the damage. He tosses me the keys. Years later, glimmering pieces of my shattered past still poke me as I try to fall asleep at night. Even on the evenings where my heart and mind are overflowing with joyous anticipation of an upcoming milestone, a milestone I once imagined sharing with a spouse. The shiny piece of the shattered past, it still pokes me. I ride the brief wave of grief, both empowering and comforting to arrive here alone. The rolling tears acknowledging the losses that happened along those winding roads. I gently lay the glimmering shattered piece of the past down next to me. We'll both just be. It never occurred to me that I could be my own escape, my own stability, my own financial security. I was in search of a savior, an escape. It turns out I didn't need an escape, rather a gentle, sometimes trying, return to myself, a rediscovering. I didn't need an escape, I needed to slow the speed and trust myself. A divine stirring was a result of that violent collision. After my heart was ripped to pieces, I ripped the caution tape from my life and everything expanded. I let myself be touched in new, unexpected ways, like the ways I ripped away from any expectations of what I was supposed to be. After the caution tape was gone, I felt everything differently, more freely, more fully, more deeply, more myself than ever before. After the caution tape was gone, there was more permission to be whatever I wanted, with whoever I wanted, however I wanted, with no more need for getaway cars.
These are very powerful. My name is Julie Brennan, or Julie Ann Baker Brennan is my full legal name and poet name, but it's too long to just say all the time. I do have a portfolio site at juliebrenn.org and com. They're only $12 each, so I decided to get them both. I'm really sorry I'm late. I drove up from Wichita and I couldn't get to sleep last night because I was so nervous about today. Didn't get to sleep until about 4 o'clock in the morning. And you think I'd be so tired that I'm not nervous? I'm still nervous. My day job is I work at kmuw.org in Wichita. It's a member-supported public service of Wichita State University. And we do have books coverage. If anybody wants to check out author interviews and book reviews and things like that, go to kmuw.org/books. I am not part of the programming team. I do the administrative red tape stuff. So, sorry, I can't get you in. Just let you know about it. So this is a very, very challenging subject. I thought I'd try to bridge that gap of grief and comfort, and I apologize if I erred more on the grief side, but I lost within 6 months between the end of 2022 and 2023, 4 very dear souls. My mother, my 2 17-year-old dogs, and my stepfather. So the piece that was selected, this one is one of the many homages to my mother that I've written. It is on page 108. Senora B's clothes. She was always a fashion plate, my stepdad says, as we look through photos to plan Mom's memorial. Wow, I had never thought of her that way. She was just Mom. Of course, she was a pretty lady who always dressed neatly. But now, too late, I can see through fresh eyes the beautiful woman she was. She must have been a teacher, my acquaintances say, when I tell them that what I'm wearing was hers. Such bold colors, rich rojas, dazzling azules, vibrant verdes. As bright as her intelligence, her passion for education, her love of languages, her drive for excellence. The clothes she wore in her final months weren't really hers, though they may have started out that way. They had a certain utility for her caretakers, zippers here, Velcro there, not what she would have chosen. And when I had to choose them for her, I learned a thing or two. Apparently, black pants do not go with everything, only with blouses that have black on them somewhere. Those were black days. But I can laugh about this now, knowing she is every color, a pure beam of light. And when I wear her bright fabrics wrapped around my torso, my arms, I am in her embrace. I'll do one more quick one. I would like to say that I'm very honored to have won the Amity Prize for a full-length book manuscript. Thank you so much, Mickey and Rhonda and Amber and everyone with On the Power Press. And if that book ever gets published, this might be one of the poems that goes in it. It was also selected for Newman University Sheridan Edwards Review, Sister Madeline Kitzner Poetry Prize a few years back. We are light waves slowed down, fossils sped up, somewhere between the stars and the skeletons. Flashes, rays, sweeping beams, glass sponges, corals, sea lily stems, ashes from wind and fire, mud from water and earth, the matter caught up with the energy.
Thank you. Thanks to Mickey and Ian and Amber and everybody who works on The Right Bridge. It's just look forward to it coming out every time. And I know how much work it takes to put out a journal like this because I'm an editor too, and it's a lot of work, and so I really appreciate that. So the theme of this latest one is grief and comfort. I taught at Douglas County Jail for 20 years. I taught a writing workshop there and saw a lot of grief. The guys that I worked with, they'd lost a lot by the time they got there. That was the grief side of it, but the writing was a great comfort to them. and they really appreciated the chance to tell their stories and to be heard and to be in a community like this and have their experience kind of valued. That was a really important work that I did there. That program closed down with COVID, and since then, well, over the last year or so, I've been running a writing class at the what used to be called the DARE Center. It's now the Homeless Resource Center with Perry in the back and Dennis. They come to class too. And what we're trying to do there is to have a space where unhoused people can come together with people in the community and we can have a class together. And it's just been a really good experience for us. If anybody is interested in getting involved, then we'd always like to see other people coming in and meeting the group of writers that we've got established there. It's been a really good experience for all of us who have been involved with it. It's the center on 10th Street in Kentucky, the single-story gray building. So we meet there every Tuesday morning. I didn't bring poems about the jail class today. I brought 2 other poems, and I'll read those today. But I think both of these poems tie in with the theme of grief and conflict. The first poem is called Dream Brother. 3 years older, always ahead of me in everything that mattered. In football, when it was all we thought about. In girls, when you turned to those strange glittering creatures. Then in music, in your band, the noise, when I couldn't even play Jingle Bells. I watched you playing bars, supporting headliners, touring to promote your first album, and for a time there it seemed you might make it. I visited you in prison after the drugs kicked in, and you'd hotwire cars to sell them for quick money. You crawled out of jail and moved in with your girlfriend and her son, ended up alone in a shit apartment on Maple Street. You were always broke, always scrounging money, always just about at the end of your dream. When I saw you that last time, heading down to the river with a bottle of red wine, I knew then that I dreamed you. And you know what? You were the most beautiful song I ever heard. And then this is my poem for John Lennon. But I think in this poem too, there's grief and comfort. For John Lennon, it's called John's Room. John Lennon would come stay with us when things got crazy for him. He had his room in our cottage. In fact, we called it John's Room. He'd call late at night sometimes and we'd leave the back door open. John would shamble down next morning wanting his PG tips, woodbines and cornflakes. We'd go walking by the river, take day trips to the sea or the hills. Sometimes John would bring his guitar, play a few songs for Holly and me. Our kids called him Uncle John. It is so crazy out there, John would say, shaking his head like he couldn't believe it. I don't even know if I want to go back at all. It was just like he was on leave for a few days, then he had to go back to the war. He'd trudge off to the train station with his guitar over his shoulder like a rifle, and we never knew if we'd see him again. Thank you.
And thanks very much to these authors. And we have 2 more short groups of authors coming up. Thanks very much, you guys. Let me welcome up to the front, please, Kimberly Ashley, Sue Kidd, Julie Sellers, Dan Nagangas, is Dan here? Margaret Kramar, Emily Renz, And Carol Vaughn. No, I missed it.
You're welcome. I don't know people.
Well, again, thank you for welcoming our readers to this sampler of the Wright Ridge Journal. And we're going to start this time with Kim Ashley. I'm going to scoot this back a little bit. I think it's in our way. That's good. That's good right there. So we're doing this in a live stream on Facebook, so I want to make sure everybody's visible. So please welcome Kimberly Ashley.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Mickey, for this opportunity. This is my book, The Seven Stones. When I began writing it, I wrote it for my third grade students, and I would write a chapter every week and read it to them, piquing their interest with cliffhangers at the end of each chapter. But school ended before the book was finished, and I put it away. Later, about 5 years later, when one of those students asked me if I'd finished the book, I pulled it out and completed it. What I see now in retrospect is that I was developing and melding my ideas about history, religion, neuroscience into a story that does not include the limbic mammal fear we arguably owe to the expansion of many of our ideals and institutions. So go on this thought experiment with me, and let's investigate a story about humanity. Dr. Robert Sapolsky, neuroscientist and primatologist at Stanford University, said in an interview recently, "We, like all sorts of other primates, don't like risk a whole lot. We don't like ambiguity. We don't like a lack of clarity. We don't like the possibility that something happens and we will never know why it did. Anxiety makes us more that way, and we have an incredibly human tendency to fill explanatory vacuums with explanations, no matter how dubious. Uncertainty, novelty, ambiguity brings out a very desperate need in us for an explanation, no matter how implausible the explanation we latch on to, because it's comforting. In other words, my words, humans are really good at making stuff up when they need to feel better." According to a computational scientist, John Whately, we are born helpless with an innate expectation to require a parental other to provide for our needs. This creates triggers in us to require that other to always provide for us when we doubt or fear. In other words, humans are dependent and seeking to be safe somehow. History tells us that animism, the belief that inanimate objects possess powers for human good or ill, was a very early way humans dealt with the traumas and tragedies of life. Elaborate and simplistic daily rituals to appease these gods through prayers and spells for purification gave humans a sense of control. Eventually, these beliefs morphed into polytheism, a collection of human-like gods to be appeased because they possess power over humans' everyday lives. Humans felt powerless and perceived suffering as punishment by the gods for their bad behavior when they lost wars or endured plagues and famine. In other words, these are my words, humans developed superstition. I'd like to do a quick quiz with you. Dr. Andrew White, a research archaeologist for the Illinois State Archaeological Survey, uses this quiz with his students. So answer the questions for me. If you feel like saying them out loud, that's fine. The Earth is at the center of the universe. True or false? The organ responsible for thinking is the heart or the brain. Some animals spontaneously generate from mud True or false? All things are composed of air, water, earth, or fire. True or false? Finally, the lungs serve to cool the body. True or false? What we know about the historical record, biology, physics, astronomy, and especially neuroscience has dismantled these early ideas. The development of scientific inquiry has challenged these errors and made human progress possible. Yet, these ideas were prominently held as fact during Aristotle's time, and he had these answers wrong. In other words, human perception has often been wrong. So what we've learned about the human brain developed through neuroscience also provides understanding that must be considered. The early mammal brain evolved for survival and reproduction and did not yet have the sophistication of logic and reason. Yet these powerful forces were foundational to molding human understanding as the frontal cortex developed. Questions about who we are, why we are here, how to escape death, they were unfathomable and would have obviously led to a search for answers using comforting and sometimes terrifying explanations. In my opinion, humans feeling powerless, incapable of intrinsic goodness, required an outside solution offered by the gods to rescue them. The need for a sense of control over their lives, and the need for classifying human actions as good or bad. Rituals surrounding the death of loved ones to deal with grief, the idea of life after death, or justice for evil with everlasting torment, brought comfort to the evolving frontal cortex of a brain's need for understanding. This need for an outside fix magnified and spread, further entrenching its way into Western thought. A moral structure developed to control behavior out of fear and shame, and the need for belonging to a group. Stories, myths, legends, written and retold for centuries, reinforce these ideas developed in religions of the West today. In other words, my words, humans rejected the sense of their intrinsic goodness and created a new reality. For me, this creates several critical questions. And for the purpose of this talk, I've narrowed it to a few, actually 5. Are we going to allow ourselves to become educated enough to resist the sphere-based mammal urge to follow ancient ideas? Ideas that may have been useful historically, but no longer serve us because we have new knowledge? Will we recognize the power we have and the responsibility to make this choice? Are we going to teach our children using the most up-to-date information we have to propel them into the future with the tools they need? And as a teacher, that really is one of my very critical questions. Will we take our power back from the institutions that have traditionally told us we need an outside fix? Will we use the legal system to create laws that are effective in curbing bad decisions and poor behavior, but also offer true psychological help for those who struggle, using what we know about the brain and rehabilitation to heal trauma? Finally, knowing we don't have it all figured out, will we address future adjustments to our current misunderstandings when they surface? This book says yes. It's about the intrinsic possibilities for humans. It can be well documented that humans are capable of living peaceful, empathetic, positive, healthy, courageous, and harmonious lives in many places around the world, and most of us do this every day. To say that humans need an outside force to accomplish this not only undermines the ability to become autonomous, it gives power away to an outside source, which perpetuates the problem and feeds existing power structures. What if humanity had not used fear to create their world, but instead followed the ideals represented by the stones? Personally, I believe each human has the capacity to learn about qualities that make life good for everyone, and in turn, internalize these qualities as worth striving for. It is on us to create that society. We must teach our children these ideals and model for them from their earliest days. Some might ask, what about the question of evil? To me, this term belongs to the old vocabulary of the fear-based brain. We have other words now that explain why people hurt others. To write this story, I needed a pure canvas to write on without the historical noise. So I made assumptions for my characters in this prehistoric world. I decided that somewhere there was once a mammal, someone very human. who was also wise and kind and thoughtful and able to recognize that humans must own their choices and take responsibility to create a world where human behavior is intrinsically motivated for good and not at the mercy of the unknown. If you have empathy, you can recognize why it matters. If you are peaceful, you can promote peace in others. If you see the good in things, you can create abundance. If you seek harmony, you seek solutions for all. If you are courageous, it is contagious. And if you seek wisdom, you use your intellect and experience. These are the 7 stones. This story is not about the gods. It is about being able to use the stones, to see the stones, the 7 stones, the ideals that call on all of us to be our best. Seeing the stones is the reward. The idea is to never lose sight of them in the first place. Thank you.
Go ahead.
You want me just to sit here?
Introduce yourself first.
Yes, I will. Can I stand up? I'm used to teaching, so I have to stand up. Okay, I am Margaret Rayburn from R, and I've written Searching for Spencer. It's a memoir about a child who died when he was 10 years old. And rather than read the first chapter again, which I read before, I'll give you a little bit of context about this. My supervisor's son was in a horrible accident where he was going to be paralyzed for life. And so some other coworkers and I went to visit his wife in the hospital. And we brought her lunch, because she was camped out by the bedside. And all she could talk about was the first date that she had with her husband. See, the son is the one who's facing paralysis. It made no sense to me at the time, but now it does. Okay, so this is what happened. A few years later, I sat with Bill in another room at St. Vincent Hospital where my children were born, and Spencer was treated as my son so many times. Bill's son had broken his neck in a car accident, faced paralysis, and was fighting for his life. Margaret, we're going to beat this thing. Todd is going to walk out of here. Todd is the son facing paralysis. Wearing a pullover sweater with his elbows resting on his knees, Bill looked at me as though he could see to the bottom of my soul. I intuited that Todd was never going to walk out of there, and that Bill was clinging to the hope that if he wished it with enough conviction, he could make it so. The next day, Michaela, Kim, Barbara, and I took an extended lunch hour and brought lunch to his wife, Dorothy, mother of his son. We found her in the waiting room, staring down at the nubs of the gray carpeting. She seemed to be very, very far away. Without shedding our coats, we waited for her to lead the conversation. I remember the first time that Bill came to the house, she said. Now remember, that's the husband, not the son. We clutched the takeout food with grease marks on the bag. I was supposed to go to my girlfriend's house that night, but then this date with him came up. He drove around the block a few times. I don't know why, because he certainly knew where I lived. Her eyes sparkled, but she was focusing on something we could not see. Sally and I had been good friends for quite a while. She was at the house that night. Bill came into the living room, she continued. We struggled to follow the logic of her narrative, but she was skipping around too much for her story to be comprehensible. She regaled us with stories of their courtship, as though she were a gay Southern belle, and we were her subservient admirers, attending to her every whim. We stayed longer and offered her the food, which she declined. She did not come down from this reverie, but waltzed through every moment of their first dates, never mentioning their child who lay in peril in the adjoining intensive care unit. We did not ask about her son and glanced at our watches. It was time to go back to the office, and we never took off our coats. I don't know if Bill and Dorothy realize how completely their lives will change if Todd is confined to a wheelchair, Barbara remarked as we approached the elevator. Todd eventually did leave the hospital, but in a wheelchair. As we headed toward the hospital parking lot that day, I thought that Dorothy's ramblings were disoriented, even peculiar, considering that she seemed to be in a time warp, separated from her son's accident. Now I think I understand. When faced with the chaos of intense crisis, we start at the very beginning, because if we can trace through our limited logic of how we arrived in the middle of this maelstrom, we can restore order. Dorothy was asking herself a simple question. How did all of this begin? Unexpected tragedy never makes sense and defies classification into our rigid systems of logic. We're left grasping our desiccated corsages and yellowed prom programs years after the event, in the dark, without a clue.
I'm Julie Sellers, also an educator, and so I have to stand. Yes, I think. I am honored to be here and be included with all of you fabulous writers. And I have a short story I'm going to read a portion of from this journal. But first I have to mention, I was so struck by the comment that Nikki made, that there are books that stick with us and become part of our life. And so I had to mention that is definitely what happened with me with Anne of Green Gables, which has profoundly impacted me. My debut novel is My Kansas Anne, Anne of Sunflower Lane, and I have a collection of poetry, kindred verse poems inspired by Anne of Green Gables. But that's not all that I write. So this story, I have to admit, came about because I have a dubious relationship with houseplants. I kill them. I have killed not one, but 2 peace lilies. I think that might be a record. People tell me they're easy to grow. No. And in when the second one was nearing its demise, I remember standing in my kitchen staring at it and going into one of my perhaps famous rants. And I looked at my husband and I said, "Peace, Lily, that stupid thing has brought me anything but peace." And I stood there and I thought, that is a good line. So this is a short story. I'm going to read just a bit from the beginning and from the end to give you a taste of it. And then I hope you will read the rest of it in the journal. So the title is Peace, Lily. That stupid Lily had brought her anything but peace. "You should definitely take it," her older sister Rose had said after the funeral, using that tone, the one that somehow managed to devalue every one of her life choices, actions or inactions. "It will be a nice reminder of Mama now that she's gone. Lilies were her second favorite flower." That emphasis, added for her benefit. The malice sparkled in Rose's eyes. "No, I think you should keep it." "Oh, no, you take it. But," as if the idea had just occurred to her, "you can send me pictures to show how it's doing." There it was. The ulterior motive that lurked under each of Rose's acts. She was setting her up for failure so that she could revel in it. Because Rose knew as well as anyone else that she could kill a houseplant faster than some people could water one. Oh, she could see the future play out before her eyes in the infinitesimal breath between the pretense of generosity and the coerced acceptance of it. She would take the peace lily or risk being branded as callous to her mother's memory. She would kill it, though the plant slaughter would be anything but premeditated. And her sister would gleefully condemn her for killing the plant from her own mother's funeral, regardless of her efforts to try to save it. She had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Of course she'd accepted. What else could she do? No, she wouldn't make it that easy for her sister to verbally eviscerate her in front of the extended family. But why she even cared anymore, what others thought of her fraught relationship with her mother, she did not know. So she buckled the unwieldy plant into the passenger seat beside her and set off cross-country to return to the life she carved out for herself, far from the biting criticisms, contrived comparisons, and cruel put-downs that had saturated her childhood. Now, here she was, out on the road at an hour that was far too late to start the trip back. Still, she'd rather be anywhere than exposing herself to more of her older sister's venom. Besides, it was the dead of winter, and the sooner she left, the better chance she had of missing the storm that was brewing. So now I'm skipping more towards the end. Another fitful night, another cold morning, another mad dash to the preheated car with the peace lily covered in a trash bag. She tucked it safely inside while she cleaned off the skiff of snow on the windshield. As she scratched her way through the layer of ice beneath, the plant came into focus, framed by the hole she was creating. She paused to catch her breath in the bitter morning air, staring at that very real, very living representation of the relationship she'd always wanted with her mother and never been able to cultivate, the bond that was always just out of reach. She recalled each pathetic effort she'd made to try to win her mother's love, every attempt to tend what was not there, and for what? It all and always had been for naught. She attacked the ice with a vengeance, ready to be on her way. As she drove, she gripped the wheel and focused solely on the road. Conditions were worsening with each passing moment. A car zoomed by, driving too fast for conditions. She tensed, feeling her own vehicle shimmy ever so slightly and seeing its movement reflected in the plant. The pickup had come out of nowhere, its high beams glaring in her rearview mirror. She lowered her gaze to avoid the blinding lights as the truck jerked left to pass her. In an instant, she realized the driver had lost control. She tensed for the impact, throwing out her arm to hold the lily in place. The crash shook her from head to toe and sent the car spinning. She tried in vain to hold the wheel, but in sickening slow motion saw the deep ditch approaching. She closed her eyes and felt the momentum of the roll. Movement pulsed through her every limb, followed by the sudden screeching halt. So I hope you'll read the story to find out what happened.
So I'm wondering, how many folks in this room are educated? I thought, I think we have a lot of educators. I'm Sue Kidd, or Mama Sue, or some people call me Gigi. And I was also kind of known as Nurse Ratchet. I'm Randy's wife of 62 years. So let me give you a little bit of background to the book. This is Nature's Walking with Cancer. It began in June 2018 as an end-of-life project to keep Randy actively involved in staying in motion, in nature, being creative, and giving some love back to his family. In June 2018 also marked the date of his diagnosis with stage 4 prostate cancer, a diagnosis that came along with ominous prognosis of roughly 3 to 5 years before the bell tolls for thee. This is Randy now speaking. Didn't take long before I got sick, literally, and tired, foggy brain, of reading about how this or that cancer patient either whooped the big C with an enormous amount of courage, fortitude, and daring do, or two, was able to endure extreme pain and suffering while being eaten alive, literally, by the anti-cancer drugs so that he could ring the bell, be applauded as a cancer survivor. So I decided to write my own version of how I would visualize and deal with cancer and its available treatments, and how I would approach the inevitability of death and dying. And here's the key points to consider. We're all dying. It's just that some of us are dying faster than others. Realizing this gives you a certain amount of preordained time to achieve what you want to do, to acquire what you want to have, and to work toward being that person that you always wanted to be. As Yoda said, do or not do. There is no try. A lot of leeway here, for pissing away your time engaged in frivolities. On the other hand, being in action makes it easier to escape the dark and the morbid, and it encourages any attempt to have some fun with our day-to-day predicaments and pratfalls. Movement, both physical and mental, is vital for keeping all parts of your mind, body, and spirit in healthy working order. And since nature is the ultimate healer, spending time walking in nature and using nature's healing energetics helps us to create our own holistic health. Stories are the essential cogs that drive our inner wheels of memory and understanding, and stories of the animals, vegetables, and minerals in nature are most often those stories that empower us to reunite our human spirit with the soul of nature. So I'm going to read a piece from his book. This is Nature Walking with Cancer, Reuniting this Human Spirit with the Soul of Nature. And it was published yesterday. It came out yesterday. This is the chapter on geese. Goose talk. It's early March, about 9 months into living with cancer, and I'm walking in the twilight of evening. There's a chilling mist in the air. The street lights, which appear suddenly out of the mist, are ordained with a spooky halo. And hearing a honking from behind, one honk, two, then several in a row. I think it's someone I know, honking to get my attention. I turn to see, trip, and toggle to the right, using my walking stick to avoid a fall. Then, out of the mist, the honker is right there, an apparition from the heavens, directly overhead. If I could still jump as high as I once did, or if I could jump at all, I would touch her feathers. I watch as she wings straight for the pond, circles twice, sets up for her final approach into the wind, lowers landing gear, and glides to a graceful two-point, webbed-footed landing atop the waters with a mega-marked retention pond. I walk up to the fence, carefully keeping a tree between me and the pond. She stands there, down at the pond's edge, honking nonstop. I leave so as not to disturb her. Hopefully, she'll be there tomorrow. And hope beyond hope, her honking will attract her mate. Well, hope beyond hope is eventually fulfilled, and I will be visiting, watching, and learning from goose, gander, and eventually her brood of goslings over the coming summer, and for several summers to come. The family. Since the early introduction to geese for the last 4 years, each of the two retention ponds, and pond number 1 is that pond that you may have noticed behind Walmart out on the west in West Lawrence, and pond number 2 is the pond that's behind Sprouts Grocery and the Free State High School. So each of the 2 retention ponds on my walking route have become a summer home to a pair of Canadian geese, and I've done my best to become the goose whisperer for each of those pairs. I'm respectful of their private lives, and I tiptoe to the fence at the edge of the ponds, trying not to disturb them. I speak to them softly in warm terms, and I tell them that I appreciate them and I wish them well. They occasionally look my way, but for the most part, they ignore me. Sometimes I'm able to sneak into position for a hurried photo op of the geese, but they're generally at the edge of being photogenic, just outside of the limits of my cell phone's camera. Most results are fuzzy images of feather lumps hanging out in green grassy stuff or floating atop gray-blue waters. Often, one of the fuzzy feather lumps has a visible head of bold black and white sitting regally atop a long and elegant white neck. The other fuzzy feather lump is usually eating or lounging in the grass with its head beneath its wing. Eventually, Mama Goose chooses to nest in the crotch of a tree roots on the small spit of land that projects into Pond 1. The long-necked, alert one is the gander, Zeus personified, acting as sentinel for the smaller, more demure nesting one. We three are on a neutral, if not a buddy-buddy terms, usually. Composing my story of Goose helps me get through the physical strain and the tedium of walking, so I can continue to lotion my joints with my motions. On occasion, we have surprised each other, me waddling on my walking sticks and then waddling on webbed feet, and I am greeted with much hissing, cobra coiled like to the ready to strike position, and an angry honking. Once, while I scanned the far horizon for their presence, they were there, walking in the grass along the sidewalk, not 3 foot away. All three of us were startled, and I was able to back off enough to make them comfortable. Another time, I had once again walked up to them unannounced, and I was afraid that he would flop into the fence and hurt himself. No worries. With a jump and 2 wing strokes, he cleared the fence and then glided onto the pond. I imagine that my goose watching ways have bonded us, the goose pair and I, into some sort of a multi-species family. For the most part, it seems they agree. At least they're not attacking me as an enemy. I didn't realize how strong the bond had become, though, until about 2 months into my walking with geese and trying to write their story. The goose blubberer. I've not seen my geese for several days now, and I'm worried that something's happened to them. I figured that it was about time for the brood to be hatched, and the hatching was a critical time for any goose family. There are plenty of obstacles to raising a brood in the city: dogs, cats, coyotes, hawks, cars, stupid people who can be a constant disturbance, and more. But when I creep up to the viewing site at the fence around the pond, there they are, down at the pond's edge, the 2 adults with heads held high. Whoa! What's that sneaking around the grasses? It looks like some sort of a long, fuzzy thing, about 6 inches long. But wait, it's not one thing, it's several things. Things that, with the aid of my binoculars, become individual goslings, buzzballs. There may be 5 or 6 or 7 of them being herded and led, front of the line and back, by Mama and Papa Goose. Then out of nowhere, some lurking danger presents itself. One honk from either the goose or the gander, barely audible. All hands are in the immediate scurry mode, 5 or 6 or 7 little fluffs of balls in motion all at once, scrawny arms, wings, feathers raised overhead, skinny legs pumping as fast as the web-footed and waddling gait will allow. In unison, they all speed to the shore's edge, and one by one, they hop and plop into the water. Goose has preceded them. Gander brings up the rear. offering a pecked prod if necessary. Goslings, thanks to the buoyancy of their fluff, bob on ripples of water like corks on a fishing line. They take immediately to the water and to the regime of staying in line and minding mom and pop. It seems to be almost unstated rule of order. Goose and gander are now in charge of the flotilla that swims to the middle of the pond, eventually avoiding some danger that I'm never able to see, even with my binocs. As they watch, the parents escort the youngsters to the far side of the shoreline. Then out of the water into the shore, the goslings struggle up the shoreline with scrawny, fuzzy, not yet wings held high overhead. Goslings become little wind waves in the grass, and Mama Goose eventually settles down, raises her wings and blankets, and they crawl underneath unto the warm goose down, blubbering. Well, that's when the blubbering begins. Damned if I know to this day where it came from. I don't cry. No male in the kid family ever cries. We're too dropping tough for that. But the tears start. Tears stream. I start to sob and blubber uncontrollably. Gaining a little control of myself, I look around to make sure that no one is watching and dry my face on my sleeves. I head for home a few hundred yards away. I open the door and I start blubbering all over again. Right there in front of Sue. Dag nabbit. Last words. So, what is one to make of the blubbering? Obviously, I was flummoxed by the geese and their goslings. Chemo fog is a formidable mind befuddler. Maybe I've been holding in too much of the grief that goes along with being diagnosed with cancer, terminal cancer. Stoicism in the face of adversity is a well-known kid family trait. Also, it could be the female hormones that they have me on working their magic and helping me to become more feminine, able to cry after all. Or maybe, just maybe, it's just too overwhelming, too mind-boggling to realize that life in nature, including life in the form of fuzzy wee goslings, will continue to go on, with or without me. Whatever it is to the end of my days, I will own up to my new title, the Goose Blubberer, and once again, I will thank nature for providing me with insights not available in the human world. Thank you.
Thank you, that was beautiful. My name is Emily Renz. Thank you so much to the Wright Bridge for publishing me. I moved here from New York City a year ago, and the poem that I wrote is a villanelle, which is a form poem, and I wrote it 2.5 years ago at a time when I never ever could have even imagined Kansas or Lawrence, Kansas, or this room or any of you. I was at the bottom of the heartbreak well, and I was seeking comfort in a rather notorious occult bookstore in New York's Lower East Side. And that is the inspiration for this poem. It's called I Paid a Witch to Make You Love Me. I paid a witch to make you love me. She said, it doesn't work like that. But I know my lock will fit your key. It was cold that day on Avenue B. Embarrassed, weary, desperate. I paid a witch to make you love me. Is it possible to die from being lonely? She took out her candle carving kit, since I know my lock will fit your key. Resorting to backroom heresy, I give up, I give in, I sob and submit. I paid a witch to make you love me. Beside a jar of wine and honey, I strike a match. The wick is lit. I know my lock will fit your key. Relinquishing my dignity, offering more than what I've got. I paid a witch to make you love me. Now I know my lock will fit your key.
Hi, I'm Beth Gully. I thought that was delightful. I read it earlier and I'm so glad I got to hear you read it. So my name is Beth Gully and my poem is called Driving Lessons. I stand in the laundry room reading labels. I actively avoid writing about the time my dad taught me to drive. In a StoryCorps interview recently, the speaker focused on learning to drive. I have a story about that. I should write it. When my son Asher learned to drive, he was a bit older than his peers. He had been in China while they sat behind the wheel of the Payola driver's ed van. I was 17, really, the summer I got my license. Kids like me who live in Ecuador can't drive until they're 18. I didn't have a chance to learn. Because you died before you finished teaching me to shift, reverse, check my mirrors, avoid potholes, pay attention to where I was going, to not be afraid of the other cars. My sweet 16th birthday present was 10 hours of driving lessons with my dad. It was typed up, printed on a dot matrix. This is where I get stuck. I drive now all the time. Still, something feels unfinished. I was promised 10 hours of driving lessons with my dad. And by my count, I'm still owed 6 or 7.
Thanks to all of our wonderful readers in this session. We do have one more session of poetry, so hang in there. There's some snacks over here. And go ahead, thank you guys. And let me invite up our next group. And actually, because we had a few walk-ins, we're gonna have 2 more quick sessions. They're quick sessions this time. So let me invite up Ann Anderson, Meryl Crabtree, Mary Lane Camberg, Carrie Moyer, Peg Nichols, and Barbara Waterman Peters. Lost order a long time ago.
Somebody all right, Carol? Is somebody next to you? No. Well, now she is. Hello.
I also want to mention our artists. The cover art for this journal, what do you guys think? Isn't this amazing? Yeah. Unfortunately, our cover artist, Adrienne D. Clayton, was unable to be here today. But we're sorry she wasn't. She's got some lovely art in here. I'd also like to mention the other artists that we have, and you'll find a bio for those artists are right inside the book. We've got Steve Barnard, Where is it? There it is, sorry. Steve Barnard, Adrian Clayton, Marcine Felt, Sujal Kagani, Barbara Waterman Peters, and Rhonda Miller all contributed artwork to the journal. And I think it makes our journal so rich to have that beautiful artwork in it. So let's please give a hand to our artists in the journal. Thank you. And we'll just start with Barbara Waterman Peters and pass the mic that way.
Thank you, Maureen. You know, I think I'm going to stand as well because I was a teacher. And I found that if I stood up and used my teacher voice, I got a little more attention. I really appreciate being published in the Right Bridge. I have come to creative writing late in life, and so it's very exciting to be published. My poem is called Willows. Willows, weep for a small child's dreams of life enduring by your streams. Strawberry sundaes, hopscotch games, roller skates, and electric trains. Hiding places, forts, pretend, reams of paper dolls and crayon schemes. Colors marching in sunshine beams. Warm wind blowing rhymes about names. Willows weep. Sultry days on butterfly wings, now ripped away like parting seams. Gone the rhythms, lost the refrains of happy laughter. Not the same, the shadowed world where no one sings. Willows weep.
Hi, I'm Mary Lane Camberg. I'm not a teacher, but I play one on TV. I'm the co-leader of the Kansas City Writers Group, and I also run a children's writers camp. So I sort of am a teacher. In fact, my granddaughter the other day said, "Jamie, are you a real writer or do you just help people?" I'm a real writer. Yeah. I'm honored to be in this wonderful journal with so many other fabulous writers and wonderful pieces. It's a real thrill. And the poem that was selected to be included is a very special one to me. A friend of mine went to India and I stayed home, and she went to a funeral ceremony in India where they are on the river. I don't know if the bodies are burning or they burn boats or candles or something on the river. And she said the women are not invited. And I said, why not? And she said, well, the women tend to weep. And I thought, that's a line for a villanelle. So that's why I wrote it. The leaving. The time to welcome sleep. No wish to say goodbye. The women tend to weep. To keep the faith, to leap, to leave the earth, to fly. The time to welcome sleep. A time to sow, to reap, to raise their voices high. The women tend to weep. A glance into the deep, to catch a glimpse of sky. The time to welcome sleep. A promise now to keep. Believing now is nigh. The women tend to weep. The ache that runs so deep, a gasp, the final sigh. The time to welcome sleep. The women tend to weep. my mother, being kind of a little bit of control freak as I am, wrote her an obituary, and I thought that was a great idea, so I wrote mine. This is called, excuse me, my obituary. Have you ever strolled the sands of San Diego, Maui, Cabo, Puerto Rico, and the Arizona desert? Known grandkids' arms around your neck, cracked a double yolk egg, acted in a play, seen stellar sea lions bask on Alaskan ice, hiked to Hanging Lake, tried fried frog legs, practiced Tai Chi, heard Neil Diamond live, felt wind in your face on the back of a bike, worn leather gloves with cashmere lining, walked to school in the snow, uphill, both ways, raised a protest sign, soaked in a hot tub, sold 50 boxes of Girl Scout cookies, smelled ozone before a storm, laughed so hard you couldn't breathe, eaten an avocado, held an Olympic gold medal, seen Kevin Costner in person, solved the Sunday New York Times crossword without cheating, steamed clams fresh from a Fire Island clamor, studied anthropology, married a good man, scarfed down a whole bag of M&Ms, all at once, hovered in a helicopter, published a book, jumped on a trampoline, swum with dolphins, drunk clear water from a spring, won a race, played the cymbals, loved a dog, served a cat, coached kids, conversed in French, made a quilt, raised 2 perfect girls, watched a glacier calve, read The Art of Racing in the Rain, savored a buffalo steak, medium rare, escaped down a firefighter's ladder, barefoot, made an igloo in your front yard, been kissed by a camel, heard an elk's shrill bugle, spit in the Mississippi, witnessed a total solar eclipse, ridden a double-decker bus, hit a slots jackpot, sipped Sangster's Jamaica rum cream, bid and made a bridge grand slam, picked ripe raspberries, driven with a police escort, sniffed a magic marker, ridden an elephant, written a poem. I have. And then to lighten the mood, I have a elegy for Stony. Do you remember the pet rock?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You couldn't just pick up a rock, you had to buy it in the store with a box. Yeah, everybody had to have one, was the rage. Elegy for Stony. I mourn my pet rock Stony, who died this morning at the age of 4 billion years. Stony was born in the fiery magma of Earth's early mantle, but he turned into a pretty solid guy. He sang in a rock band until he got stoned too often and his voice became too gravelly. He often let people walk all over him, but sometimes people tripped when he was around. In his youth, he was a rolling stone, but in later life, he hated exercise and preferred to gather moss. He took a job as a doorstop until promoted to paperweight when he moved to the desktop. In retirement, he sat on a shelf at the Franklin Mineral Museum in New Jersey as an example of igneous rock. Stony now rests in Mauna Loa's molten lava, melting and waiting to be reborn, magma to magma, rock to rock.
Thank you, Marilyn. Oh, I'm going to sit because I left my cane over there by my chair, and I'm a whole lot older than Mary Lane, who brought me here today from Olathe. We both live in Olathe. I'm also kind of a latecomer to this reading. I didn't let Nikki know that I was going to come because I didn't know that I would get a ride. And this is not poetry. This is a little bit of prose. So we'll break the, we'll have a little bit of prose in the midst of all the poetry. This is 4 $1 bills. I didn't want to be bothered. Why should I let an 11-year-old boy I did not know and had never seen before spoil a fine lunch with old friends? Parked at a good spot in front of the restaurant, I was glued to my seat as I watched the boy with his heavy backpack half run along the sidewalk from the alley to the cross street and back again and again, obviously looking for someone who was failing to meet him. His hands were empty. He had no mobile phone. Who was he expecting? Likely an adult, probably his mother. I could read the boy's mind. Where was she? Delayed by an accident? Fatal? I didn't want to get involved. My hands were stuck on the steering wheel. A late arriving friend who had parked in the restaurant adjacent parking lot scurried up the sidewalk to the entry. Glimpsing me, he motioned me inside. The boy's face was flustered, his hair in disarray, his eyebrows in a deep frown. How long would he continue his agonized pacing? When would he abandon the wait? Catch a bus to return to home base? Maybe he had no money. My friend who had disappeared into the restaurant reappeared, waved at me again. Your friends are waiting. Why do you linger? Money. My conscience eased with the thought. I pulled 4 $1 bills from my purse. To help the boy, I could put some power in his pocket. The boy stopped, impatient but polite. I put the bills in his hand. Maybe you could buy yourself a sandwich, I said. I guessed he is about 11, an age when all boys are hungry. I don't mention he can use part of the money for bus fare home. Let him make that decision. A bit baffled, he takes the money. I hasten into the restaurant. I leave the boy out on the sidewalk with his problems. Inside the restaurant, out of sight, his concerns no longer trouble me. Haven't seen my friends for quite a while. We have a lot of catching up. The food is great, take your time, enjoy, and the drinks, beer, bourbon, Kahlua. The restaurant clears, the crowd is gone. We have the place to ourselves. We can relax a little more, get a bit rowdy, and offend no one. The owner is pleased to have us. We keep everything lively. We can stay however we want, keep ordering drinks. Our departure is slow. Vague promises to meet again. I do not think of the boy again until I push open the door and step outside. Where is he? Gone. Still talking goodbyes, I walk to my car. 4 $1 bills fluttering in the breeze, caught by the windshield wiper with a note, written in a childish hand, half printed, half cursive. Dear nice lady, thank you for the money, but everything is okay and I do not need it, so I am returning it to you. Thank you. I glance around. People come and go along this busy sidewalk. How many people have passed my car, seen the bills waving in the light winds, and continued walking? The bills have been secured only by the windshield wiper, free for the taking. Transfixed, I slowly remove the money. I am stuck on the sidewalk. It is almost beyond belief that we still live in an honest world. Thank you.
Let's stand. I think, yeah. So I want to thank Vicki and Ian and Aaron McCara for including one of my pieces in the journal here. So we've all seen a dead squirrel on the road. And we've all hoped that one squirrel running across the road makes it. Who's swerved for a squirrel? A little?
Yeah.
So I was pondering squirrels when I wrote this, called Morning Squirrel. I'm driving, drinking coffee when I see a brown lump with a touch of red on the road. And I think squirrels play a dangerous game to get to another tree, some acorn to eat. I take care not to run the squirrel over again. How it's all sad. The road, the fuzzy rodent, and take another sip from my morning coffee, which is starting to grow cold. So this next piece is my wife's sister died, and this is titled Expired, and it's in the most recent edition of Foothills Review. Expired. My wife stands above the stove, sobs about her dead sister, gone too soon, how they can't talk when she needs. I'm silent. Useless as an expired coupon stuck to a refrigerator door. In the theme of the pandemic, I wrote this, and this is in Thorny Locust, the most recent edition of that. It's called Lamb's Blood. First it came from my wife, then our boys, and it's my turn now, lying in bed, sick as I've ever been. And I think to myself, this new plague, 2 years in, finally got past the lamb's blood smeared on our front door. I write really short poems, so I can get a few out. This last one, my dad would have been 83 years old on Friday. So talking about care and loss and grief, the son of a recovered alcoholic who was brilliant and tortured and troubled. He's in me, and I was kind of pondering that when I wrote this. It's called Dad at the Wheel. I'm 9 again in Dad's calico convertible. Its panels like autumn leaves. One panel blue, another yellow, another rust red, everything bright and dying. I sit on a torn seat, and my mother's with my father again. Father's hands twitch, one on the wheel, another clasping a white beer can, cigarette at his lip. His blonde hair blows in wind, his eyes blue and feral, under wide blue skies. I feel that touch of wild in me, grown 51, whenever I stretch, whenever I drive. Thank
His eyes blue and feral. I love that.
I'm Meryl Crabtree. Thanks for hanging in. My poem is on pages 93 and 94, if you want to look. It's on the comfort of sleep, and I recently returned from a week in the hospital, and I really love my bed. Getting back to my bed. Lullaby of comfort. My legs take me into sleep. I curl them around a small pillow that huddles between my knees. I read somewhere that sleeping with such a pillow protects your back, and my back needs protecting. My body zigs and zags around the pillow. My restless legs gradually grow quiet. The rest of my body follows, grateful for a chance to be still, grateful to give the lead to another body part. It takes a mountain sometimes to understand what the river is saying. It takes a river to sweep light back into darkness. My bed swallows my body, letting it sink into its own river of dark, a void of calm. I sleep on my side, legs zigzagged beneath me, pillow mounded between my knees, its cool touch a touchstone for sleep, permission to cuddle into my own arms, fingers pressing my hand into my cheek, feeling my hair as it necklaces my shoulders. I shift until it smooths beneath the shoulder closest to the mattress. My sheets receive the weight of me as I wait for sleep. I breathe now, scanning the rest of me, setting forth with oars lifted across the bow, letting myself rest, letting the resting body carry me into the rest of the night. Sleep now. Listen to the ticking clock, the faint barking of a neighbor's dog, the welcome sprinkle of rain on the roof. Noise is no enemy. It lulls me deeper into the river. I sense the ghosts receding, assure them and myself that all is well, despite the whirlpools of daylight that lie on the dawn ahead. Tomorrow, I will zigzag my way through life with the hopeful embrace of a well-slept woman. Hair in need of cutting, but curling down my back with the weightlessness of age. Knotted hands finding their work within silent walls. In the evening, I will begin again the rebirth of sleep, the hallowed pillows for head and knees, sheets billowing around me, legs scissoring under me, drifting into the waves, into night's plenitude. Thank you.
Last but not least, I'm Ann Anderson, and thanks to Mickey and everybody that put this on. Usually I'm writing books. This is Post of a Mid-Century Kid. This is a memoir about growing up in the mid-century. And this is The Adventure of the Bottle Cap, a story about my grandparents raising a bottle calf, not a cap. People are like, how'd you write about a bottle cap? But anyway, words have always kind of been my sanctuary and refuge. And in the 8th grade, I wrote a lot of poems, as maybe you did, because we learned about poetry. And I think that was so exciting, putting poems together. It seemed so glamorous. And then in 9th grade, we got creative writing. And so then we did creative writing, and I kind of stuck with that. Back in the pandemic, when we had lots of time to do poetry and every type of writing and make movies, I started reflecting a little bit more on some of the, I guess, bad things that happened to me in my life. And I read a book called My Dark Sweet Vanessa. And it was strange. It got pulled at the library eventually. But it was one of those books that was about a professor and his abuse of a 15-year-old girl. And it was haunting to me because that's what happened to me in junior high and then in high school. And it was one of those things, I guess, because I have a really positive attitude, I had just soldiered on and glossed over. Back then in the 60s and late 60s, you told somebody, and in the case of junior high, they transferred him to another junior high. And in the high school, actually nothing was done. And he has since died. The teacher in junior high was still teaching in Fort Worth, and when I found out he was going to be in Kansas City for a book event, I actually went over and confronted him. And yeah, and it was really, 50 some years later, it was really great thinking a book had prompted me to be able to do that and realize. So from reading that, I wrote this poem called 14. 14. She had her first boyfriend who leaned against her locker, wrote her songs he played on his guitar, and wrote her on his Stingray handlebars. She sat in the classroom, and the teacher was handsome, and every time he walked by her desk, he paused and would casually place a hand on her shoulder. Stop by after school. I have a book for you. He offered it to her and put his hand on her arm for what felt like too long, and her cheeks and heart were hot with confusion. She lost interest in her boyfriend, who suddenly seemed too immature. She drifted away from the scent of English leather and rides on the handlebars. The teacher moved in closer each day into her space and made her feel grown up and beautiful, and she quit biting her nails. Her mom bought her hose. He made friends with her family, and she dreaded his visits and savored them. She felt danger and she felt infatuation, but it was not meant for a 14-year-old girl. It was also wrong. It would wreck her childhood. The teacher took from her the joy of being a girl and having a boy. Waiting at a locker. So, anyway, that was something that just like I can write a story, but it seemed to make a little short poem fit. So, anyway, that's it. On a happier note, I think you never know what your writing is going to do, and I write on Facebook all the time. My site, Friends of the Flint Hills, and Peak at History Geeks. Right after Sarah Smarsh wrote Heartland, somehow she saw something I posted about rural mail and some other things. And she wrote back, a real person at that point before she became famous, and said, may I use some of this in a National Geographic article? I'm like, oh, well, let me think about it. And then she emailed me, and it was like not one of her people. It was like Sarah Smart. And she said, okay, this is when it's coming out. So, yes, that'd be great. So it appeared, and I didn't think any more about it. And then Lindsay in Euphoria, when she got her book, she said, your stories are in here on page 221 or whatever. So it's really exciting to know that people pay attention to your words. And, you know, I noticed people put on Facebook, I got rejected. Well, yes, you're always going to get rejected. It's a terrible word. We need to come up as writers and poets with a better word than rejection, because that sounds awful. But keep writing, keep doing poetry, because you never know who you're going to touch. And whoever wrote that book inspired me 55 years later to come to grips with something that happened to me a long time ago. So thank you all very much.
Please be patient for one last group. We've got a small group to wrap us up, and then we've got refreshments. Please help yourself to refreshments. So let me invite up our last group, and we'll switch out. Dan Nagin-Gast, Perry Shepard, Adam White, Michelle Zoombroom, and Gerald Vaughn.
Nah.
And each contributor, don't forget to take your book home with you. Did somebody just leave a book up here? If you forgot your book, ask for one at the back when you leave, or give me a holler and I'll send you a book. So again, I would like to thank all of our contributors, all of our artists, all of our poets, all of our essayists, all of our fiction writers. We had an enormous amount of wonderful submissions, more than we could actually fit in here. We tried to do our best, and we hope you'll submit to the next journal. The topic of the next journal is Ideals and Illusions. And that's open October 1st through December 31st. So now I'd like to introduce our last group. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay. I'm Gerald Vaughn, retired United Methodist minister. My poem is called In a Home on the Range, and it's about my grandfather, who was a real cowboy. He loved horses. He wore with forces during World War I, very important to him. And so when he was put in a home on a range, of senior citizens home for retired soldiers, he told me some of these things about what he missed being out on the prairie. So this was just kind of an ode to him, but I'm the same age he is now, and I'm discovering I'm going through some of the same things he is. So maybe it's me and him both. So this is entitled Home on a Range. When I was young, I used to ride the Kansas prairie, filled with pride. My saddle pals were by my side on saddles made of good cowhide. But all the friends I had back then are buried in their old buckskin. They were all the kind of men whom I can't wait to see again. I miss those cold days branding cattle, though now it would be quite a battle to get me mounted in a saddle. Plus someone in this home I'm in would tattle. Yes, a home is where I dwell, but it's just my prison cell. Since some quack said I'm not well, I'm confined here for a spell. He told me that my bowels are leaking and knocked out teeth keep me from speaking. Chaw tobacco makes me reek while my joints all seem to creak. I never thought I would survive to reach the age of 75 because I should not be alive, since heart attacks number now 5. I'm suffering pain I've never known, including unpassed kidney stone, causing me to moan and groan and spend hours on my ceramic throne. Oh, how I miss those prairie nights when stars served as our only light. And sometimes we would get in fights. Well, here I'm scratching for bed bug bites. I also long for my old horse. His passing filled me with remorse. My tears flow freely for him, of course, since we were an unbeatable force. Other things I won't forget, including the smell of saddle sweat, or the night we all got wet, discouraging a thunderstorm stampede threat. My knees I find, are hard to bend from a fall that didn't mend, since I've never had it pinned when I fell off my old friend. In the silence of my bed, I ponder on the days ahead and consider all that I have said. Again, I wonder why I'm not dead. Instead, this aging, worn-out coot who can't put on a single boot is stuck inside this institute, avoiding any type of staff dispute. Still, despite my advanced age, I dream of riding through the stage. But since I'm in my final stage, I pray God will turn the page. Yes, I'm confined and often worry that God will not be in a hurry, because once in heaven I plan to scurry to find my horse to give a curry.
Thanks everyone for coming out. I'm Adam White, just from down the highway into Topeka. So my poem is titled Angelic, and it's on page 100. This poem I wrote because I'm a member of a Zoom poetry group that we just pick like 3 words out of the dictionary and we write a poem. So the words were just endoskeleton, glandular, and I think defective was one of the words. So, but I wrote this, and it's kind of just skims the surface of just a scenario that came up in my mind using those words too. I'll just read. Crimson and cobalt lights beckon across the bay, hit her hazel eyes, the impact deeper than I could ever conceive. Up from the grave, the sun rises and the lights fuse into a sickly, intoxicating lavender, only visible for a few moments before the brutish end. That's when her sighs send signals to the heavens, asking angels to receive her. I hear her, but my hands are tied. I know she sometimes feels defective, a worn down, rusted out worker. Fingertips pounding away at corporate keyboards, sitting at a corporate desk while she laments her corporeal form, body dysphoria, but who's really looking? Her bones hurt, an endoskeleton of endless regrets, troubles, and strife, medical bills stacked dread on top of dread. Throw in a bonus glandular condition while we're at it. Monster of the week, flavor of the month, days blur into savage swirls of worrying what the future holds. I wish I could take the pain away. An angel is almost always heaven bound. An angel is rarely found walking the streets, offering free sample miracles. 2 a.m. and flashing crimson and cobalt lights fuse into a sickly, intoxicating lavender before yellow tape wraps as the halo of the brutish end. Still, she commutes through the city's arteries every God-given day, sits, punches in numbers and names until time to go home, eat, cry, pray, and sleep. Thank you.
Well, I'm not a strict educator, but I was a director of academic and vocational programs for about 23 years. So I need to stand up too. My poem that I'm going to read today came about right when the pandemic started really hitting this country. America, America, when the sadness settles over the land, you struggle, a struggle ensues, and you develop a pathology that drags you down. Citizens stumble in confusion with the undefinable enemy. Those whose legitimacy is denied become the target of the power minority who talk with loud voices. The true population, treated as a minority, end up with the loud talkers' scrapes. And in spite of this, you know, you can see through the roofs. So we go onward, doing what we can, given our load, our burdens. The burdens change from day to day, but still we traverse time and space until there is no more. And I work with Brian Daldorf on our poetry workshop that we do every Tuesday at the Dare Center there in Lawrence. And I've been doing it now for about a year with Brian. And I've written probably 200 or 300 poems out of it. And I've developed a whole genre that I'm working on. I call telling stories. And so I like telling 3 of my little short stories to them. The little one is out there. I hear her shallow breath. She is snug in the covers. I tap on her door, hoping that she will awake and I can take her in my arms to help her feel safe and loved. She has nightmares in the night. Her beginnings was one of struggle, those being that sired her into her third chaotic world, barely gave her life. I was able to rescue her when she was still an infant. I was amazed that being so young, she was already severely damaged. And so when she cries in the dark night, I go to her and sing. And the song soothes her so quickly that she falls into a peaceful sleep. And I have hope that she will grow and prosper into a woman who has love and gives love to those she touches. I want to do another one. It's called Smoke Hangs. Smoke hangs in the curtain between us, not the kind from fire or cigarettes, but the smoke of confusion, the smoke of misunderstanding. And I have to take responsibility for my part in creating this smoke. I can see her, I can't see her or listen to her expressing to me what she's expressing to me. I cannot see her, she cannot see or listen to me and know the words I spew out. I cannot see or listen to her and know the words she spews out. And neither one of us is able to share all we feel, nor how dedicated we are to make this life right. So with the smoke we have going, we were trying and trying and trying until at some point, a clear wind rises up and the smoke leaves and we embrace each other and with tears sliding down our cheeks. Yeah, let's go this way.
Hi, my name is Dan Nagengast. I'd like to thank Mickey and Andrew and everyone else for putting this together and also for publishing this and this whole event. I write about things that have actually happened to me, and I've taken this sort of pandemic time to go back and revisit them and try to understand what happened to me. And I've been in many weird places in the world and many weird things that happened to me. And so it's kind of fun to fill in the gaps, which you can do now with a computer, what was going on there, that sort of thing. Anyway, I do write quite a bit about West Africa and also Western Nebraska. And you can find all of that stuff on a Substack. This particular story is an African story. Every evening in Tihun, the tiny village where I lived, came peacefully and quiet. There were no engines or power sources anywhere near the village. There was no electricity or pumps. Tihun is in Sobini chiefdom. Southern Sierra Leone is on the vast West African belly that pushes out into the Atlantic. It is in a tropical rainforest, green and lush, about 50 miles from the sea. My house across from the school was on the north side of the village along the red gravel road leading to bigger places, including the town of Matrujon, which is about 11 miles away, where there was a missionary hospital. Between my house and the village, there was a large sloping pineapple field that went down and then came back up, and perhaps 10 acres. The low-growing nature of pineapples allowed me to really have a clear view, which doesn't happen in Sierra Leone because of all the forest. A row of tall palm trees to the south and the village just beyond. As twilight deepened like clockwork every evening, a cluster of black and white West African crows and a flock of white cattle herons would wheel in a wide circle once above the pineapples and land in those palm trees down there to roost for the night. This was like clockwork. It never varied. I assumed I was the only one in the whole village to ever notice this because of my catbird seat up there at the top of the pineapples. As night fell, the only sounds coming from the village were the murmur of voices, perhaps some clanking pots and pans, goats or dogs. One evening, the crows and egrets circled the field, touched down in the palms, and then startled and immediately took flight again. They were agitated. This happened several times until they finally landed and settled. Curious, I turned on my speculator. Was there a snake in the tree or a monkey? But it's just my passing speculation of why this was happening. A very Western thing to do. A bit later, I noticed a vehicle was coming. You could hear a car from miles away on the gravel. This was true where I grew up also, on the high plains of Western Nebraska, where passing cars were rare. You could hear a car for 5 minutes because there was so much silence. I had a practical understanding of the Doppler effect as a child before I ever knew it was a scientific phenomenon. In Nebraska, the car could just be passing you by, but in Tihun, the car was always coming to us because we were where the road led. From the village, every morning, a small, snub-nosed Japanese pickup loaded with people, grain, produce, chickens, goats, broken tools, any and everything that needed to go to a larger city would leave around 7 a.m. Then around 5 or 6 in the evening, it would return. You could send notes or letters, money or produce with the driver and be sure it would get to the proper person. It was rough travel, but reliable. There were no other vehicles that regularly came to Tihun. Barring a public official and government business, the road was used by only our community lorry. So the sound of the vehicle coming at this late hour was unusual. I perked up, and I'm sure everyone else in the village did too. Who could it be? Why was it coming? It passed by my house and entered the village. It was a small lorry. I could tell it parked in the center of town, and I knew people, especially kids, would be moving towards it. A short time later, within half a minute, I heard the ululation of keening women, rising and growing. That sound causes unease. I and the whole village started moving towards the sound. Tihun was where the paramount chief, Chief Bio, made his home. As a Peace Corps volunteer, I was some of the bacon he had brought to the village. Paramount chiefs have a large coterie of family and relatives around them. If male, they may have multiple wives, but these all come with extended families with needs and expectations. The chief is expected to provide food, land, or opportunities. Among that group had been a likable but kind of aimless young man. I think he was the brother of one of the chief's wives. He clearly was not cut out for farming. The chief made him the policeman for the chiefdom. There was no salary, but he got 3 squares a day in a uniform. He was expected to do the chief's bidding and to be present whenever court was in session or if there was some dispute that needed settling. He carried no weapon, and it was not really considered an authority figure, but he was a projection of authority. A few days before this lorry showed up, he had fallen ill and was taken to the hospital in Montreal, and now his body was being returned. As I drew closer, the keening grew louder and people were congregating or hurrying away to tell others. It was a shock to everyone. There was an uproar in the village. I talked for a bit with people near the lorry, and then I walked towards Aggie's house. Aggie was a youngish woman who cooked and laundered for all the orphans, people with no family in the village. I was in that group, along with my counterpart, Safa, who's agriculture extension agent, a couple of laborers assigned to him, and a school teacher or two. Aggie, who we hung out with on rainy days or sometimes in the evenings. I found Aggie and we talked about the policeman, what disease it might have been, the tragedy generally. For some reason, then she said to me, "In Budden, notice you don't know. The birds didn't roost tonight like normal." I was surprised that other people in the village had even noticed the birds and their strange behavior. Then she said, "I know then, something not to find, not in Budden." The hair on the back of my head, on my neck stood tall, as it only will when we encounter the supernatural. I knew then what this translation is, I knew then something wasn't right. The birds. She had noticed the routine was broken that evening. She had turned on her own speculator and had arrived at an entirely different speculation than mine.
All right.
Hi, I'm Michelle Zumbro. I'm a therapist out of Emporia, Kansas. I've been writing most of my life, but I've just been publishing a couple of pieces in the last couple of years, or last year actually. The piece I'm reading a truncated version of the essay I submitted for this. So it's about my Aunt Sherry's death, something that I, at 50, still have yet to completely come to terms with. So. The commotion from the living room made my eyes fly open. Darkness cascaded through my bedroom window, so I knew it was still nighttime. A sliver of light shone under my door, so I knew someone else in the house was awake. 13-year-old me stumbled into the living room, fuzzy-headed and blurry-eyed, to find Mom frantically putting on her shoes, purse over her shoulder. "There's been an accident. Sherry's been in an accident," was all she said as she hustled out the door at 2 a.m. that March morning in 1987. Wendy and I waited a half hour, an hour, 2 hours for Mom's return. When she did return, she looked haggard, her eyes swollen and red from crying. Sherry, her older sister, was dead. She had been driving over an unmarked railroad track when a train smashed into her truck. She died instantly, but her oldest son, Shane, who was her passenger, survived and had been admitted to the hospital. They'd been out in the middle of that dark, cold night because Sherry's youngest son, Sean, was on a Greyhound bus to Oklahoma so he could see his father. Okay, now we're at the funeral. A long-winded Baptist minister led the funeral service. It was so apparent he knew nothing about Sherry, as he really didn't say much about her at all. Instead, he sermonized about God's plan and repentance, about getting saved. My family had a die-hard, unquestionable belief in God, but we didn't attend church. We didn't even read the Bible. Mom, even in her grief, grew frustrated with the sermonizing and gave the minister a very obvious wrap it up sign. One of my aunts was 5 months pregnant, and I thought, rather uncharitably, that her baby might be born before he shut his mouth. Some families come together in grief. Other families, especially families with trauma, like my mom's family, allow their grief to rip them asunder. Sadly, this is what happened that night of my aunt's funeral with my maternal family. Blame was launched like missiles between some of my family members. One person even told another person, it should have been you that died that night, not Sherry. It took almost 20 years for that rift to heal. Sherry had to be tough in response to her tough life. She was the oldest of my grandmother's 6 daughters, and it was not easy in my grandmother's home. My grandmother worked full-time outside the home, so the care of the house and the siblings was dropped onto the shoulders of Sherry and my mom because they were the oldest. My grandmother was married and divorced several times. There were 4 fathers for her 6 daughters, so sometimes it was tough at school. Mom once told me she suspected Sherry also had a learning disability, something like dyslexia, although that was not really anything considered in the 1960s small town Kansas. Sherry left high school and left home when she was 16 or 17. She ran away with the man who would become the father of her sons. She had 2 living sons, but her youngest son had been born prematurely and died a month before my birth in 1973. Sherry ended up leaving the father of her children and married a man I considered a bum. He worked sometimes and did little that I ever observed to make anything about Sherry's life easier. Sherry ended up working 2 jobs at a time, and she didn't always have the most reliable transportation, so she had to walk to work in the heat and the cold, wind and storms, miles to and from her home. Her sons were a little wild, and one was even violent sometimes. She lived her life the best she could, working hard with a spunky attitude, not really asking much from others. While I loved Sherry, I thought I was better than Sherry. My nuclear family was very working class, but Sherry was poor. We lived in a simple ranch-style house. Sherry lived in my great-grandmother's dilapidated, old, and supposedly haunted house. It was literally falling down around her and her family. We always had a car. Sherry did not. Sometimes Sherry smelled like body odor and cigarettes. There would be times she'd come to our house to use our washer and dryer during the day when mom was at work and we were at school. On a few occasions, I would be home and sick. Sherry would come over to do her family's laundry. Sherry would always ask about my life, about school, and I always answered in terse 2 or 3 word sentences. I never hated or disliked Sherry. I was just a teenage snob. Definitely not my finest moment, and it was definitely the worst of me. The grief I initially felt over Sherry's death was not my own. I felt shocked at the sadness of her death and then had to adjust to having Sherry's sons live with us. But watching my mom and my family grieved me. A memory forever etched in my brain is just decorating that Christmas tree later that year, tears streaming down my mom's face as she talked about missing her sister Sherry. I excused myself to go to my room and I started to cry. And then in that moment, I realized how deep grief and loss can be and how helpless one feels when there are no easy answers to questions like, why her? Why now? What can I do to make this better? I now grieve Sherry for herself. I miss that I did not get a chance to know Sherry as a person and not just as my poor aunt. As I matured, my empathy and compassion deepened. My understanding of poverty, trauma, systemic injustices deepened. Sherry did what she could with what little she had. She was also loyal and would not back down from a fight if it meant protecting someone she loved. I grieve that I didn't know what her favorite movie was or her favorite song. I grieve that I never asked her personal questions about her life. I grieve I didn't appreciate who she was as a person, and that shame fills me when I recollect what a haughty kid I was. At 50, I now attend more funerals than I do weddings. I am an orphan, and my grandparents have died. I have had friends who have died from cancer, suicide, and accidents. I've had to learn to make friends with my grief, as she seems here to stay, and fighting with her only makes me feel worse. But I've also learned that grief is just another word for love. Thank you, guys.
And thank you for the perfect ending to our program. Grief is another word for love. Thank you all for coming. That really was the perfect ending. Thank you so much.